They always said weddings were supposed to be joyful, a celebration of love where laughter floated in the air like music, where families reunited, and strangers became friends for a night under the glow of chandeliers and champagne. For her, though, the moment she wheeled through the arched doors of the grand reception hall, it was not joy that settled over her but a strange, hollow quiet that pressed against her ribs. She had been here before, in this very hotel, not for weddings but for business conferences and summits. She knew the way the polished marble floors reflected light, the way chandeliers sent diamonds of brightness scattering across the room, the way people's heads turned when she entered, not because she was in a wheelchair, but because she was her. The youngest female CEO of a tech company that had climbed to the top of its industry in under a decade. She had faced venture capitalists who doubted her, competitors who tried to undercut her, and investors who told her no. In every arena that mattered, she had proved herself unstoppable. And yet, here, at her cousin's wedding, surrounded by flowers and the shimmer of silk dresses, she felt as though every bit of that strength had been stripped away. Her cousin Emma had always been radiant, the kind of girl who seemed born for moments like this. She wore a gown that looked spun out of starlight, her smile dazzling as the groom twirled her on the dance floor. The applause was thunderous, cheers rising as the couple kissed in the center of the room. Everyone leaned closer, eager to capture the memory on their phones. She sat at her assigned table near the edge of the room, her chair slightly apart, her place setting pristine, untouched. A glass of sparkling water glistened before her, the condensation dripping down its stem, but she hadn't taken a sip. She adjusted the lapel of her dark navy dress, tailored to perfection, its sleek cut meant to remind her that she belonged here, that she wasn't a shadow against the celebration but part of it. Yet no amount of tailoring or design could erase the truth that, as laughter echoed and couples mingled, she was an island, adrift and alone. A group of bridesmaids swished past her, their dresses a soft blush pink. Their perfume trailed in the air like a ribbon, and one of them whispered too loudly, "She came alone." Another hushed her quickly, but the sting landed. They thought she didn't hear. She always heard. Her fingers tightened on the arms of her wheelchair. She knew how to wear armor. A confident smile, a tilt of her chin, the kind of presence that made boardrooms go still. But here, the armor cracked. There was something about weddings that peeled people open. Everyone became exposed. Lovers declaring devotion, parents crying at speeches, friends promising forever. And she, sitting in silence, could not escape the reminder that her forever was still empty. She scrolled her phone out of habit, her thumb brushing across emails she didn't need to answer tonight, calendar alerts she dismissed with a flick. Anything to avoid lifting her head and seeing the pitying glances, the looks of curiosity that never fully disappeared. Some people still only saw the chair. Others saw the power, the title, the headline, self-made CEO, Forbes's 40 under 40. Very few saw the woman, the heart that ached, the loneliness that echoed even in a hall full of music. When the band shifted into a faster song, couples filled the dance floor. She watched them sway and spin, sequins catching the light, heels clicking against the wood. A man lifted his wife into a playful dip, both of them laughing as if the world belonged only to them. Another couple, barely out of college, clung together as though afraid the moment might disappear if they let go. She had always admired that rawness in people, the vulnerability of it. She also feared it. Once, years ago, she had imagined walking down an aisle herself. She had imagined lace and flowers, not a corporate deal but a vow of something eternal. But life had a way of folding those dreams into corners. First came the accident that took her mobility when she was 25. Then came the relentless climb of her career, her determination to prove she could still conquer a world that assumed she had been defeated. Love, romance, had been pushed aside. She told herself she was too busy, that she didn't need it, that success was enough. But nights like this betrayed her. From her table, she could see the sweetheart stage where Emma and her husband now sat, golden light casting halos around them as they fed each other cake. Their laughter filled the microphone, and the whole hall seemed to glow with it. Guests raised glasses in toasts. The photographer snapped shot after shot, and she smiled politely, clapping when appropriate, though her heart remained heavy. At one point, a middle-aged man, an uncle she barely knew, approached her table, his tie loosened, the faint smell of whiskey clinging to him. He leaned closer, speaking with the kind of forced cheer that made her stomach twist. "A brilliant woman like you, successful, beautiful, how is it you haven't found someone yet?" He laughed, as though it were harmless, as though it weren't a dagger masked as a compliment. She swallowed the ache, returned a practiced smile, and said, "Some things can't be rushed." He nodded, satisfied enough, and left her in the same silence he had found her in. It was always the same. At corporate dinners, at family gatherings, even here. People marveled at her achievements, but when they realized she was alone, their voices softened, their gazes shifted. They thought they hid it well, but pity was the easiest emotion to recognize. She looked down at her hands resting in her lap, nails painted a neutral shade, the kind of color chosen for elegance, not attention. For a brief second, she imagined what it would feel like if someone reached across the table, if fingers laced through hers with a warmth that had nothing to do with pity and everything to do with wanting her. She exhaled slowly, chasing the thought away. As the night deepened, the wedding only grew livelier. The band's music swelled, the clinking of champagne glasses rose, and speeches brought both tears and laughter. She played her role well, smiling at the right moments, clapping when others clapped. But when the spotlight swept the room, she remained on the outskirts, her presence dimmed by the very space she occupied. A child ran past her table, chasing a balloon, her laughter bubbling. The sight softened something inside her, reminding her of innocence untouched by judgment. She followed the child's movements with her gaze until the balloon disappeared into the crowd. Then she returned to her untouched glass of water, condensation now pooling around its base. She could leave, she thought. She could slip away, retreat to her hotel room, lose herself in reports and numbers. No one would blame her, no one would notice. But something stopped her, a whisper deep in her chest that told her to stay. Maybe it was loyalty to Emma, maybe it was hope, however faint, that the night might yet hold something more than solitude. The lights dimmed as the couple shared another dance, this time slower, the bride's head resting on her groom's shoulder. The entire room seemed to sigh in unison, a collective breath of tenderness. And she, sitting alone at the edge of it all, felt the ache sharper than ever. The applause that followed rang hollow in her ears. She adjusted the wheels of her chair slightly, a small movement that gave her hands something to do, as though controlling this one motion might steady the storm inside her. She told herself she was fine, that she had chosen this life, that she had everything she had ever worked for. And yet, beneath it all, the silence of her empty seat at the wedding screamed louder than any applause. And so she remained there, a woman of power and poise, hidden beneath layers of strength, watching joy unfold around her, never knowing that in only moments, a stranger with kind eyes and a little girl's laughter would shift the course of her evening, and perhaps, the course of her life. The music had just shifted into something more upbeat, the kind of rhythm that encouraged even the shyest guests to get up from their seats. She watched the dance floor fill again, couples spinning, friends linking arms, laughter ringing across the hall. She kept her place at the table, her glass still untouched, her phone resting black-screened beside it. It was easier to pretend she was content, easier to keep her posture straight, shoulders relaxed, eyes half-focused on nothing. But deep down, her chest tightened with the weight of invisibility. It was then she noticed him. Not because he was extraordinary in appearance, not in a way that demanded the attention of a room, but because he moved differently than the others. There was no rush to his steps, no eagerness to join the swirl of dancers. Instead, he threaded through the crowd with ease, his hand wrapped around the smaller hand of a child who hopped along at his side. A girl, no older than 5 or 6, her curls bouncing as she skipped, her face lit with delight at everything around her. He wore a suit, though the jacket was gone, left somewhere behind, and his tie hung slightly loosened as if he had already abandoned the fight to keep it neat. He wasn't polished like the groomsmen, who looked fresh from magazines, nor was he sloppy. He was real. His hair was dark, swept back without much fuss, his jaw lined with faint stubble that suggested the day had been long. Yet his eyes, kind, clear, warm, stood out. They searched the room not with the predatory scan of a man seeking attention but with the careful watchfulness of a parent ensuring his daughter was safe. The girl tugged at his hand, pointing toward the tables of desserts, then toward the dance floor, then toward the chandeliers above. She seemed to want everything at once. He laughed quietly, the sound unguarded, and bent low to whisper something in her ear that made her giggle uncontrollably. The sound of her laughter cut through the weight pressing on the CEO's chest, drawing her gaze like a spark in the dark. And then, without hesitation, the man began to walk toward her table. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Perhaps he was passing by, or maybe the desserts behind her were the real destination. But his eyes locked onto hers, unwavering, and before she could prepare herself, he stopped at the edge of her table. The little girl stared openly, her wide brown eyes filled with the kind of innocent curiosity that knew nothing of pity or judgment. "Daddy," she whispered too loudly, "she looks like a princess." The man chuckled, glancing down at his daughter with affection before lifting his gaze back to the woman in the wheelchair. There was no pause, no hesitation, none of the awkward shifting most people displayed in moments like this. Instead, he smiled, gentle, genuine, as though he'd been waiting for this moment without even realizing it. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady, low enough to keep the exchange private but carrying easily over the hum of music. "My daughter thinks you look like a princess." He straightened slightly, tugging on his tie with mock seriousness. "And I find myself in need of a dance partner tonight. Would you?" His smile widened just enough to soften the words. "Would you be my date?" The world seemed to still around her. She had expected small talk at best, perhaps another backhanded compliment disguised as kindness. But this boldness, this lack of pity, this effortless charm, took her entirely off guard. She blinked, certain she had misheard, until the girl at his side nodded eagerly, curls bouncing, eyes sparkling with encouragement. For a long heartbeat, The CEO forgot her practiced armor. She forgot the polite smile she wore like a shield. All that remained was surprise, the flutter of something inside her chest that hadn't stirred in years. Her voice caught. She cleared her throat lightly, trying to steady herself. Are you always this forward with strangers? Only when they're sitting alone at weddings, he replied, quick but not sharp, his tone laced with warmth. He leaned slightly on the back of the chair next to her, casual but not invasive. And only when my daughter insists. The little girl giggled again, tugging at his hand. Please, dance with us. Something in that plea, the unguarded sweetness of it, the innocence untainted by adult hesitation, slipped past the walls she had built around herself. The sound of her own laughter surprised her, soft and genuine, bubbling out before she could catch it. It had been so long since she'd laughed like that, so long since she had felt the sting of tears held back for joy instead of pain. Well, she said slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips, who could refuse an offer like that? The man's grin widened, relief flickering across his features as though he had worried she might turn him away. He extended his hand, palm open, not pulling, not insisting, just offering. His eyes never left hers, and in them, she saw no pity, no discomfort, no forced politeness. Only invitation. Her fingers hovered over the armrest of her chair for a second. She had danced before, but rarely. Too often, offers were given out of obligation, or worse, pity. Too often, she had said no to avoid the sting of it. But this moment felt different. Carefully, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, warm, unhurried. Great, he said, his voice laced with a quiet triumph. Let's show them how it's done. He guided her chair gently toward the edge of the dance floor, the little girl skipping ahead, clapping her hands with glee. People glanced their way as they moved, but for the first time in the evening, she didn't shrink under the attention. She didn't feel like an outsider. Instead, she felt as though something invisible had shifted, the weight she had carried lightened by a man and his daughter who had seen her differently than anyone else had tonight. When they reached the floor, the music swelled, and the little girl spun in a circle, her arms flung wide as though she owned the world. The man laughed, releasing her hands so she could twirl freely, then leaned close enough for his words to be meant for the CEO alone. By the way, he said softly, I'm Daniel. And this little ball of energy is Lily. She smiled, the name anchoring the moment in reality. It's nice to meet you, Daniel. And Lily. Nice to meet you too. Lily exclaimed, grabbing the CEO's free hand with her small one. You're really pretty. The compliment hit harder than it should have, not because of the words but because of the sincerity in them. She squeezed the child's hand lightly, her throat tight. Thank you, sweetheart. Daniel placed a hand lightly on the back of her chair, careful, respectful, never presuming. Ready? He asked, his eyes holding hers again. She nodded, and as the band played on, she realized she was. What happened next wasn't a traditional dance, not in the way most people thought of it. But it was movement in rhythm with the music, guided by laughter, shared between three souls who, for a fleeting moment, made the rest of the hall disappear. Daniel stepped in time with the beat, guiding her chair in gentle spins, while Lily twirled between them, her laughter like bells. People glanced their way, some smiling, others whispering, but none of it mattered. For the first time in years, the woman who had always stood alone felt herself drawn into the center of joy. Not for her title, Not for her resilience, not for pity, but simply because someone had asked, without hesitation, without fear, without judgment. And as she laughed, really laughed, her heart whispered something she had